Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing FinkelFrand in a 15 plus 2 game on leechess.org. Let's open with e4 this game. FinkelFrand 2210. Active in all rating categories. Pretty sure I played this player before. Yeah, we have 7 past encounters, and I'm 7-0, but I suspect that's because of bullet. We probably played the entirety of our games at a bullet time control previously. So let's play a Lopez. Bishop b5. The dreaded Berlin. I'm going to play knight c3 and take it into a 4 knights. I have not done this before, but this is a move that probably doesn't get as much play as it should on move 4 against the Berlin. The main line is castles, whereupon black can play knight takes e4, and then d4 leads to the famous Berlin endgame. d3 is also played very often, but knight c3 is perfectly legitimate, just developing a piece and defending the pawn on e4. And usually black will respond with bishop b4. And I only have experience with that position from the black side, but I'd like to try to prove an edge for white if I could. Happy Monday to everyone. Hope you had a good weekend. I've been enjoying following the candidates tournament and also the Lee Sedol versus AlphaGo match, which has 4 games in the books out of 5 total. Okay, so bishop e7. Now, I can't play takes because after d takes c6, knight takes e5, black can, I believe, regain the pawn with knight takes e4. And then the idea would be knight takes e4, queen d4. So I don't think that's a good idea, but I can just castle here. And if black were to castle, then bishop takes c6 is working, I think. So I wouldn't be surprised to see FinkelFrand play d6 in this position. Maybe knight d4, trying to counterattack the bishop on b5. And he does opt for d6. Let's play d4, opening the center. Black is playing in the style of the Hungarian defense, like against the Italian game. But this time my bishop is on b5 rather than c4. I guess you could compare this to simply a Steinitz defense in the Ruy Lopez via a weird transposition. And I'll take with the knight should black capture. I do remember playing FinkelFrand in 1 minute and thinking they're pretty solid. And I'm sure standard is more to their style of play because I think I've flagged this player quite a few times in 1 minute. So bishop d7 is forced here. No other good moves. And I think on bishop d7, I'll take with the bishop on c6 and try to preserve my strong knight on d4. I really like setups against this pawn structure, the pawn on d6, whereupon white goes b3 and bishop b2. I've had a lot of success like that, so I might play that way. See, this is not a moment that black should be thinking because their move is absolutely forced. You have to play bishop d7 here to break the pin. Queen d7 is not a move anyone in their right mind would consider. So I don't know why FinkelFrand is spending time on that move. Okay, he plays bishop d7. So let's take. They could take with the bishop, and then I could take back with my knight if I want to have a guaranteed structural advantage. But I suspect that black will take with the pawn. This is what most players do. Bishop takes also gives up control of f5, so in addition to taking on c6, I could also try to do something with knight f5. Maybe rook e1 first, although that does give them the option of bishop d7. So if bishop takes c6, I would be leaning towards taking and just establishing a slightly better pawn structure. Although there's a famous Capablanca game that demonstrates the usefulness of this pawn structure for black, so it's not one-way traffic for white. It's not like white has an automatic and guaranteed advantage. Black has fighting resources of their own. Yeah, let's play this b3 setup. So trying to put the bishop on the long diagonal. It will be blocked by a few pieces of our own, but if these knights clear out, the bishop will be useful on this a1, h8 diagonal in the future. My classical rating is finally established on Lee Chess. At least I think so. Yeah. I no longer have a question mark next to my game. So we'll see how high we can get in this time control. I hope my winning streak continues. Knock on wood. So black castles. Let's play bishop b2. Black could try to trade off this c-pawn for my b-pawn with c5, c4 at an appropriate moment. If c5 is played now, I'm going to play knight e2, I believe, and possibly even stick my knight on g3 in the event of bishop c6 trying to attack e4. I think rook e8 is a logical candidate move for black. They might want to prepare bishop f8 and have the rook attacking e4 along with their knight. So if rook e8, I'll probably answer with rook e1. They could also think about rook b8. I bet that a plan of c5, c4 in conjunction with rook b8 is even stronger because my bishop on b2 would be undefended. Okay, so I mentioned that I was leaning towards knight d to e2 here. I wonder if knight f3 is also playable with the express plan of pushing e5. Let's say knight f3, bishop c6, and then e5. Black has bishop takes f3, unfortunately for me. Queen takes f3, d takes e5. And the structure is kind of a mess, but they are up a pawn. I could play knight f3, bishop c6, rook e1 on the other hand, and try to push for e5. That plan may be okay. Yeah, I'm not sure about knight de2 anymore. I was initially sort of pleased with the look of that plan, but now I'm having second thoughts because sending the knight to g3 may not be the best square in the world. And I'd like to keep the e-file open for my rook to come here. So I'm going to change my mind and play knight f3. And I like the fact that I have a 2-minute advantage. I could try to ponder the differences between knight f3 and knight de2 a little longer, but these games always indicate to me the importance of being practical when you're playing a rapid game. And 15 plus 2 is certainly in the rapid category. In over-the-board chess, for those of you who don't play over-the-board chess, a common time control these days is game in 90 minutes with a 30-second increment per move. And I play tournaments 40 moves in 90 minutes with 30-second increments, and then if the game is still going after 40 moves, you get an additional 30 minutes. So those are long time control standard games, and 15 plus 2 is quite a bit faster than that. So bishop c6 is played, just putting the bishop on a good diagonal, and here's where I was thinking rook e1, since e5 could be met by bishop takes f3 as it stands. So we'll play this useful move. A lot of times black will try to go knight d7 and then bishop f6 in these structures. So FinkelFrand could play that regrouping. If knight d7, I'm thinking knight d5, trying to jump in and take advantage. Then the game could go bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop f6, bishop takes f6, whereupon I may have a tiny advantage in that simplified position. 2 sets of minor pieces will be swapped off, but I think white's structural edge gives me something to play for. What other moves come to mind for black? Yeah, he plays knight d7. So this does stop e5, because if e5, a capture here is playable. But I'm pretty happy with the looks of this move, so I'm just going to play it. Threatening to eliminate the dark square bishop and opening our dark square bishop. You can see that in this setup, there is a tendency for those knights on c3 and d4 to move to different squares. So even though that bishop was buried when I put it on b2 a few moves ago, it's now more free. And if bishop takes, I will take with the queen, because taking with the pawn, even though it opens the e-file, I feel like my d-pawn could be a target on that square. And I'd rather take with the queen so I have a chance to attack d6 later on, maybe with the help of e5 and rook a d1, moves like that. In fact, I'm going to pre-move this move. So I think there's a very good chance that black will take the knight. So trying to predict how the game could go. Bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop f6. And in addition to bishop takes f6, I guess I also could try e5. All right, but he's going to play rook e8. So he wants to keep the light square bishop and give me the option of taking on e7, which I, of course, could do right now. So if knight takes e7, queen takes e7, then e4 is sort of in danger. I mean, he'd have to play bishop takes e4 to prove it. I feel like I should take this bishop. Otherwise, bishop f8 and black is going to have a reliable position. And even though that knight in the central square d5 is looking imposing, I don't see what sort of threats I can create with it. So yeah, let's take, entice him to recapture with the queen. I guess he could take with the rook as well. If rook takes, I'll probably play knight d2. Queen takes seems more coherent coordination-wise because the rooks are connected, but he could play rook takes e7. Maybe a plan is rook takes e7 followed by queen f8 and rook a to e8. Kind of a clever way to double up the rooks on the file. But no, he opts for the simple queen takes e7. e5 still not working because of that bishop takes f3 reply. I don't think it's working at least. Yeah, I'd be surprised. The question here is if bishop takes e4 is worth stopping. I mean, is it really a threat? Because let's say hypothetically black gets another move and does this. I could play knight d2. And they'd probably reply with f5, whereupon f3 would be winning material. Maybe they have other moves instead of f5 like queen h4, but I think g3 I'm probably winning a piece. So it makes me wonder if I can play some move like queen d3, for instance, looking to go queen c3. I guess queen d3, bishop takes e4, queen c3. There's queen f6, though. And I don't have enough attackers on e4 to take advantage of that. So I may need knight d2 if I'd like to bring my queen out. Yeah, because queen d3, bishop takes e4, I can't play knight d2 right away because he just takes my queen. So that's not working. Queen d2, bishop takes e4, knight g5 perhaps? What's up with that line? f5, f3. That may be working. But queen d2, takes away that square from the knight, so I'm not sure about it. I'm going to go with knight d2 and reinforce and just play it safe. I think I can still look to get my queen out maybe via f3 or g4. I want to send my queen to attack the g7 pawn in alliance with this bishop on b2. Probably I won't regret playing knight d2. The knight wasn't doing a lot on f3 if I wasn't pushing for e5 any further. So this looks okay. I would encourage you guys this week, especially if you find yourself in a rut with your chess game, try to sit down and play some standard games. I know a lot of you watching these standard videos already do play standard games, but it's worth noting, if you want to get better, and online chess is your most convenient means for playing other people, which it is for most people these days, then try to increase the time control and play longer games. If you're used to playing bullet and blitz, say to yourself, I'm going to take my chess improvement very seriously this week and play games where I have ample thinking time. And set yourself a limit. I mentioned this just yesterday in my blitz stream that I did. It's important to set yourself a game limit. And if you have a lot of free time, maybe 4 games in a day, tell yourself you're not going to exceed that amount of games in a day, and take them as seriously as you can and analyze them afterwards. Draw some conclusions on your own after the game. Try to figure out where the turning points were. Zero in on the moments where you lacked a plan or were just unsure what to do. And have some idea of where you could have improved going into the analysis. So before you click on that computer analysis or look at it on Lichess or chess.com, wherever you're getting it, have some thoughts in mind about where you could improve. Don't just be a robot looking at the computer analysis. And post later this week and let me know how you do. See if that helps your game, playing some standard games and taking it more seriously. So knight f8. This knight might be making its way to g6 to block the attack on g7. Should I play queen g4? I still like the looks of queen g4. I could also think about playing e5 here. That opens the light squared bishop. That would be my misgiving about playing that move. So if queen g4, knight g6, where is my follow-up play? What am I doing thereafter? I'd like to budge that knight, but playing for f4, I guess they always have queen h4 if they want to parry some of those ideas. Maybe I could trade and then play f5, however. Queen g4 is going to be hard to pass up. I think I'm going to play that move. Yeah, let's not grab our rook. Let's grab our queen. Threatening maiden 1. A developing move with tempo. And after knight g6, I'm thinking this f4 move might be good. Menacing f5. The thing is, I'm not sure I'm going to play f5 thereafter, but the mere fact that black has to think about f5 and has to actively consider how to defend against that idea is going to cause them to burn time. And I may have a 2-to-1 time advantage here soon, so I'd like to press black and give them lots to think about. G6 looks like it weakens the diagonal too much, so I don't expect them to play that move. They might play f6 to try to establish 2 connected pawns on the same diagonal as my dark square bishop. Knight e6 instead. So maybe trying to make use of the d4 square is FinkelFrand's idea. Trying to jump in and thereby block my bishop. I could send the knight back to f3 now, which also defends the g5 square and d4. And off the top of my head, I like that a lot. It does block the f pawn, though, so I can't go f4, f5. So if I play f4 right now, and black replies with knight to d4, and then bishop takes d4, pawn takes d4. If I play knight f3, they can take on e4, I suppose. Yeah, they can probably get away with that. Because it would be nice to have 2 moves and be able to play f4 immediately followed by knight f3. But that's against the rules of chess. I can't get 2 moves in a row. Yeah, let's do knight f3. And we'll check afterwards and see if f4 was also playable, allowing knight d4. But this move restricts black. I still can think about moving my h-pawn down the board, maybe h4, h5. Also, knight h4 to f5 comes to mind. I don't see any immediate breaks that black can achieve, like d5 would just serve to weaken their structure and open the e-file. Also lead to trouble on g7, so they're not going to play that way. They could maybe try for a5, a4. That would be a common device, trying to use the hook on b3 to trade. If a5, I'll probably play a4. Maybe they could go c4 thereafter, or rook b8 with an eye towards playing c4. But I think I will create some threats on the king side that black will have a hard time ignoring. And I'm pretty solid on the queen side myself. I mean, even if black were to achieve a5, a4 and take, I could always just take back, and there might be some simplifications, but I wouldn't be losing anything. And he seems content to spend, at least 30 seconds to a minute per move. So the clock is becoming more of a factor now. Yeah, he plays f6, reinforcing. Here, this gives me a good reason to play knight h4 coming up. I can do it right now, even. Knight h4, idea, knight f5, of course. I'm liking that move. Also, knight h4, knight d4, bishop takes d4, pawn takes, knight f5, and I'm threatening the queen, g7, and d4. So let's flash this move out. If that pawn had remained on f7, I would have been more hesitant to play this move because of queen g5, looking for a queen swap. But here that move is not possible anymore. I gotta say, after having played 15+2 for the past couple weeks on Lichess, I like it better than 15+0, which is the time control that is used in the standard pool on ICC. You notice I haven't been playing on ICC. That 2 seconds just seems to make a big difference in the quality of play. You actually get a game decided by a chess result instead of purely the clock sometimes. Yeah, so FinkelFrand plays this move, but I think the flaw is that I can just take and then play knight f5, and black is in big trouble. Maybe they're going to play queen d7 in that case, but still it looks bad. Yeah, I'm going to take. And then I think their idea will be knight f5, queen d7, whereupon knight takes d4 is impossible because I would lose my queen. But I have a hard time believing this because d4 remains so weak for them. I could even play knight f5, queen d7, queen f4, and I just don't see how they defend the d4 pawn. Note that queen f7 here would lose outright to knight h6 check. So queen d7 is forced. If queen e6, queen takes g7 is mate. So once more, this is a move that FinkelFrand should play right away. I guess there's queen f8, but that loses the pawn on d4 with no fight. So given their time situation, if I were black, I would play queen d7 as fast as I could. And he does. So knight h6, king f8 doesn't seem to lead anywhere. But this queen f4 move, on the other hand, looks pretty good. Queen h4 also. If queen g3 trying to escape the pin, he can take e4. So I think queen f4 is the way to do this. Yeah, let's play that way. So simple plan of knight takes d4 next move. I also thought briefly about f3, trying to defend the queen on g4 and the pawn on e4, but if knight takes e4, or knight takes d4 thereafter rather, and we get a trade, I'd have to mess up my pawns and e4 would be weak again. So I think it's best to just get out of the same diagonal as black's queen. We have 51 spectators in this game. Wow, that's a lot. All right, so let's pick this up. Probably they'll double up the rooks and try to get some sort of compensation. Maybe they have some compensation in the form of a coming d5 push. Like say rook ae8, f3, d5. That is something they could try. So f3, d5. Looks weird to weaken the pawns like that, but maybe. Rook a d1, d takes e4. Yeah, I guess that may get the pawn back. So, do I actually want to play f3 in view of d5? Maybe I shouldn't even bother with that move. D5 looks like a pretty powerful reply. I might just want to play queen d2. But that's so lame. Gives back the pawn. Knight f5 isn't doing much. Hard to believe that this and this just works for black, but I think it does in view of my weakly defended rook on e1. Knight takes c6, queen takes c6. Also c2 is under attack there. Yeah, I might just have to move my queen back and be okay with some swaps. Okay, let's do it. So we'll just defend this rook and give them the e4 pawn. I'm going to have a slightly better pawn structure and a time advantage thereafter, so this is kind of a practical decision. On the other hand, if f3, d5 had been played, I feel like that might give black some confidence and momentum in the position. And here I'm just acknowledging that I can't hold the pawn. Not the ideal continuation, given what I thought I had a couple moves ago, but a practical one, as I said. One aspect of improving that's tough to get a handle on, because even strong players fall victim to this, is looking at the same line repeatedly and trying to force it to work. Like, I could have sat there for longer trying to make f3 work, but my instincts just told me that after d5 black is fine. So it's not worth spending another 2 or 3 minutes trying to prove my instincts wrong, if that makes sense. You don't want to get blinders on and just lose your sense of objectivity because you want a line to work. That's really silly reasoning most of the time. And he takes with the bishop. Yeah, that's probably a good move. So maybe rook e3 here. g2 is a little bit tender, though. I got to watch that. I could play f3, but his rook on e5 is pretty well placed. I could play f4, but if I play f4, this bishop may be hard to evict. Rook e3 is the first move that came to mind right now. I might do that move. It's probably not a bad one. Rook e3, bishop takes g2 doesn't work. If rook e3, queen g4, I always have rook g3 or f3. He can try to kick my knight back like rook g3, c5, but probably knight e2 is okay. Nothing glamorous, but okay, let's do it. If rook g5, I'll probably play f3. So I'm just trying to double up the rooks and maybe go here next. I'd rather him initiate a trade on e3 if, like, I have my rooks doubled than me play f3 and then rook takes e5, because he could recapture with one of his pawns, and I don't like the look of that. So let's bring this into action. Looking for a trade. He's extremely low on time now. And as I alluded to earlier, this is a problem with the way FinkelFrand plays sometimes. Okay, here I'm thinking knight f3, idea being rook takes e3, rook takes e3, rook takes e3, queen takes e3. And at the very end of that line, he can't take on c2 because I have queen e8 checkmate. So I think that may work. It does simplify the position, but it may be the best way of playing. Similarly, there's knight to c6, looking for the same type of thing. But no, I think this is better. Let's do it. For one thing, it blocks, like, so bishop e4 at the end won't be hitting g2. And now he might need some sort of luft move, or queen e4 maybe. Queen e4 I might be able to take on a7 though. He plays queen f5. Okay, here I could play knight d4 or take here. Queen takes a7, queen takes c2. I give a check on a8, king f7, queen d5 check. I feel like I need a luft move for my king. That would be best if I had one. No, I think I'm going to play knight d4. I know he might play queen e5 against this move. Yeah, he lost on time, which is a shame. I was thinking if queen e5, queen takes e5, and then let's say F takes e5, knight b5, bishop takes here, and then I can take either pawn. I'm not sure about that position, though. I was also thinking queen e5, knight c6, but that would lose to queen a1, so I couldn't go there. He might be fine at the end, but yeah, time just got the better of him. So the opening, I would say, was fairly standard. We played this knight c3 move, taking play into a 4 knights defense, or 4 knights variation. And then he played bishop e7, which is not a move I'm as familiar with as bishop b4, because this is the move that I normally play as black, and it's the most popular. But black obtained kind of just a Steinitz style position. And they took on c6 and went with the queenside fianchetto. I didn't get in the e5 advance, as I would like to have. He played knight d7, kind of maneuvering against that. And I thought this was a little surprising, although in retrospect it may not be a bad decision for him. He has a choice of which bishop to give up, either play bishop takes d5 or allow me to play knight takes e7. He might have made the right call, because if bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, I feel like white is slightly better with 0 risk there. So at least here, there's opposite colored bishops on board, a bit more of an imbalance. And if he can arrange his pawns on dark squares, like play this f6 move coming up, maybe my bishop isn't so great. So here I pivoted and tried to defend e4, didn't worry about advancing e5. Maybe knight g6 is better for him here. Knight e6 seemed like a riskier defense. It seems like his position is a little more vulnerable to attacks after knight e6 versus knight g6, which just blocks my queen, and it's hard to dislodge the knight there. One thing I will look at is if the engine likes some better move than knight f3, like maybe f4, but I didn't want to allow knight d4 in that case. Yeah, so here he played f6, which I think is good. I mean, you notice that black has virtually all their pawns on dark squares, playing against my dark square bishop. So I need to find some weakness in his camp, and I thought knight h4 was correct now that queen to g5 is not possible. So my knight is going to settle on this nice f5 square. And it seemed to me that knight d4 was just a blunder, but in view of the game continuation, it may not be so simple. I thought I was just going to win the d4 pawn, and it would be not an easy win, but I'd have a completely stable advantage, and he'll have little time. But he surprised me with the amount of counterplay he got here, and f3 potentially running into d5, which we'll verify with the engine, but I'm pretty sure is just the case. So maybe right here I need something savvier. I still feel like I have a good position, but how do I prove it? Another move I was thinking about was rook ad1, looking to take with the rook here. But if rook ad1, g6, rook takes d4, I guess I don't even have to respond to the threat yet. Let's say king h8 or f8. I can play knight back to e3. We trade queens, and maybe he has f5 at the end. It's kind of a convoluted line, but rook ad1 is a candidate move here. Yeah, when I played queen f4, I just didn't see this coming counterattack against e4 in conjunction with d5. And after he plays bishop takes e4, black should be fine. If black is at all worse here, it's only very slightly, and black might even be slightly better for all I know. It's even material. White structure is a tiny, tiny bit better. Black has 3 pawn islands to my 2. It's usually better to have less pawn islands. That means your pawns are connected. But the time just got the best of him. He took way too long to get to this position. So we swapped. Important point here that bishop takes c2 leads to queen e8 mate. And I'm also hitting the a7 pawn. So he may have played a good move in queen f5, attacking c2. And I played this. And if he had continued with queen e5, I think the resulting endgame is unclear. Like, say I play that line I mentioned, queen takes e5, f takes e5, knight b5, hitting the 2 pawns. He takes on c2. I should probably take a7 there, although I'm not positive, and try to use my outside passed a pawn, but I don't know. I doubt that I'm better there. Also, it seems like his king might be a little closer to the action than mine. He can take a more diagonal route to the center, whereas my king is blocked by the f2 pawn. So let's go to the analysis board. We both played pretty well according to the engine. I had 1 inaccuracy, 0 mistakes, 0 blunders for an average centi-pawn loss of 10. And my opponent had 1 inaccuracy, 0 mistakes, 0 blunders as well for an average centi-pawn loss of 9. So that's a pretty well-played game. Nobody even making a mistake or a blunder according to the computer. You do see that more often in positions that are kind of simplified. Like here, there weren't any huge tactics going on. And when there's not huge tactics, there's not going to be bigger swings in the evaluation typically. But still, I think that means a pretty well-played game. Yeah, and here I have the opening book loaded. You can see that bishop b4 is the most common. Knight d4 also played. Bishop d6. His move bishop e7 is way down here. Only 6 games according to this database we're following. Okay, now it loaded some more, probably because of a transposition. And one point I made is that if I try to win a pawn like this, I didn't think I could hold it because a knight takes e4. This is a common device to win back the pawn. And then after takes, he has queen d4, forking both the knights. So he'll get one of them back. However, after I castle, if black were to simply castle, now this is going to work. Because in the event of this, once again, in queen d4, I can actually grab some material, like knight takes c6 is working. Previously, if white was uncastled, black would play queen takes e4 with check. But here, queen takes e4, knight takes e7, queen takes e7, white is just up a pawn. Opposite color bishops, but a pawn no less. So d6 is, I think, necessary for black to defend the pawn. Otherwise, I might play bishop takes, followed by knight takes e5. So d6, d4, e takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop d7. Yeah, and I almost always take with the bishop here. It might be possible to play differently. Perhaps I should look into different avenues to play. Like I see rook e1 is one of the main moves. Let's just follow the book for a second. This also, I guess, transposes. Yeah, queen f3. Essentially, black has the bishop pair plus a slightly worse pawn structure. White has a knight on d4, a bit better pawn structure, but has to be careful about how they open the position because later on those bishops could prove their worth. So knight takes c6, b takes c6. I just played b3, preparing this fianchetto of the dark square bishop. c5. And knight f3 seemed like the correct call here. I mentioned knight de2. We're actually still following some games. I see knight de2 has been played in 5 games, but white has better results playing knight f3. They're 2 for 2 with this move, and the computer also likes it. So the thing I didn't like about this move is I felt like if I were to do this, my knight is blocking the e-file, and I'm not thrilled about sending it to g3, if that's indeed where I were to be sending it. Maybe I could play f3 as the computer is suggesting and try to go knight f4 and focus on d5. But I have a feeling knight f3 is objectively a tiny bit better. So bishop c6, rook e1. Yeah, knight d7. I see the engine wants to do something on the queen side for black. Rook b8 could be a good way forward because that allows black to think about c5, whereupon I will not be able to take because of rook takes b2. So maybe rook b8, although it does allow e5, doesn't it? Yeah, I forgot that I was intending e5 here with the knight coming to f3. Yeah, point being that now if bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, I've just played rook e1, so my pawn is defended. White's better. I'd love to play a position like this where I have a much improved structure. Or a much better structure. So knight d7 was directed against my plan of pushing e5 and also perhaps enabling him to play bishop f6. So I jumped to the center. Yeah, he played correctly, rook e8. Let's just take a look at this line. Bishop takes d5, queen takes d5. This is even better for white. Yeah, probably the asymmetrical minor piece situation and the fact that e5 is always ready for white does give white the upper hand. It looks like he made the right call. Rook e8, knight took. The engine says don't take and instead develop and just allow bishop f8 because that's what I thought black would do is play bishop f8 and kind of hunker down and keep the bishop pair. The computer likes white, probably just likes white's grip on the position. Black is cramped. I do have this nice knight here. So maybe knight takes e7 is too simple, and maybe I should play queen d3 and keep more tension in the position, but it felt right. I'm aiming for a small advantage based on the pawn structure, and I'm eliminating black's bishop pair trump. Yeah, knight d2 is correct here, defending e4, knight f8. I played queen g4. So the computer is suggesting different moves at times for both of us, but they're not really shaking the evaluation. It's a difference of like 0.1 or 0.2. So in such cases, you can't strictly go by what the computer says. Yeah, now it actually likes the move I played, queen g4. And I thought he should play knight g6 here. He played knight e6, but this felt correct to me to block the queen. And also, it doesn't hinder his play down the e-file. Also, h4 is defended, so I can't go h4, h5 because he can just snatch this pawn. So I would have played knight g6 if I were him. He played knight e6, though. And key moment right here. So the main candidate moves I was looking at was f4 and just knight f3 as played in the game. The engine also gives knight c4, knight d4. What happens if knight d4? Because this is what I was a little concerned about. I guess he's not threatening this, is he? Yeah, because of mate. So that gives me time to play f3 and stabilize the position. With knight c4, the engine clearly wants to put the knight on e3, I think. Or maybe push e5, but probably it has in mind the maneuver of the knight to e3. Maybe take knight f5 somewhere. So I played knight f3, but it's dead level now. Yeah, f6, good pawn play by FinkelFrand, putting pawns on the same diagonal as my bishop. Only downside is it allows knight h4, but in view of what happened, I don't know if this is leaning too much for me. FinkelFrand says he's so used to 10 plus 15, he forgot it was only 2-second increment. Yeah, that can happen. I don't know if you're open to advice, FinkelFrand, but I think you got to speed up. Like some of those moves you made, you just took too long to make simple moves, like bishop d7 in the opening. It matters a lot in games with only 10 or 15 minutes. I know I'm hardly the person to talk about time management, but there's some moves that you kind of got to play because you don't have any other alternative. So knight h4 and then knight d4. Now this move seems to be a mistake, but how to punish it? Instead, the engine wants to go here, inviting this, but I guess the idea is queen g6 in that case. That's a subtle maneuver. So dealing with the knight h6 problem by offering a trade of queens and kind of just going from there. Yeah, this endgame would be completely fine for black if it happened. Even though he's got doubled pawns, they control a lot of territory, and they're pushing me back. And the e4 pawn could be a weakness for me. So instead, this knight d4 move, and how do I take advantage? So here, queen d7. Yeah, queen d7 is forced. I was talking about the downside of other moves. Queen f7 allows knight h6 check, and the g pawn is pinned, so we win the queen. Queen e6 runs into queen takes g7 mate. Queen f8, I think I just take on d4 and win a straight pawn. His bishop's not even defended in that case. And here is probably my big mistake of the game, playing queen f4. I thought I had all my bases covered there, and I was just winning a pawn. But more accurate to play f3, which I mentioned, but I thought, okay, so let's say he plays rook e5. Yeah, I thought I wouldn't be able to do this because of the trade and then him just taking here. Pawn's no longer protecting it. But I just need something subtle, according to the computer. So how did that line go? f3, rook e5, and now here. And finally, we're ready to pick up the pawn on d4. I see. So if g6... queen g3, backing off. Yeah, because we don't want to allow that queen trade on g4. And he's still stuck in the pin here, so we're going to win the pawn next move. Yeah, just some accuracy needed with those two moves. Maybe I would have found that if I spent more time. I don't know. But I didn't sense the danger right here. And he found a nice resource with rook e5. So nicely done, FinkelFrand. Rook e5 I took here, and yeah, I think the position's roughly level now. Maybe white's even a little worse. You can see after queen d2, it actually goes up in black's favor. Not hugely so, but that's an indication that black has completely solved their problems. So here the computer wants to play this move, but what to do after d5? Point being that I can't take because a rook takes e1 and black wins material. I thought he was just winning a rook, but I guess I can win the bishop thereafter, but I'm not going to think about this line. Going down in material. FinkelFrand says, by the way, I actually thought I had blundered a pawn on move 3. Knight to f3. I don't know what you mean by that. Move 3 was bishop b5. Maybe you mean a different move? Knight to f3. Oh. Well, that's just a common opening, right? Knight f6 is the Berlin. It's kind of an odd comment to make. This is an incredibly common opening in your 2200 classical. Why would you think knight f6 would blunder a pawn? f6, I mean? Oh. FinkelFrand, you're confusing me. I'm just curious what he means. Do you mean, not that he can hear me right now, but do you mean bishop bishop e7? Yeah, well, as I was saying before, that would not be blundering because of knight takes e4. So even if he wasn't intending that, he might have figured that out had that position occurred. So let me go to the end of the game because I think there's not too much more to look at. Queen f4, rook e5, knight takes d4. So maybe f3 was playable here, but what is the... Oh, wait, sorry, after the doubling of the rooks. So maybe f3 was playable here, but what happens after d5? Knight takes c6, queen takes c6, queen d4, or sorry, queen d2, take, pawn takes, rook takes. Okay, so the engine just wants me to simplify, but this is uninspiring. Technically, I still have a structural advantage, but with this much material traded off and a heavy piece endgame, it's not going to be worth anything. Yeah, this is at best a draw. But then again, queen d2 also didn't lead to anything, so yeah, black's entirely out of the woods at this stage. So queen d2, bishop takes e4, and I played rook e3. And his big problem was he just didn't have any time here. Engine says retreat the bishop like he did. Queen g4 is maybe a little aggressive. I don't think I would have played that move myself. Maybe he can just leave the rook on e5, because as I described, like let's say black just plays some move like h6. I am probably not going to initiate a trade here because I don't want to give black a good excuse to put a pawn on e5 and grab more space. And actually here, this even looks good. Like maybe he can try to win the c2 pawn or something later. Let's see how that works out. Rook d8, hit the knight. Yeah, and go after c2. So he can leave this rook on e5, block the file. He doesn't need to trade on e3. I guess here I am attacking him with the knight, so he's got to do something about that. He could have played bishop e4 here. Yeah, and point being that if I take, then queen takes g2 as mate. What if I play h3? Just queen back to g6 and keep the threats. Okay. Yeah, bishop e4 looks good. And I would have had to come up with some defensive move. Because black is threatening bishop takes f3 now. And then I can't take with my g-pawn, and if I take with the rook, then rook takes e1. So here, so I can do this and try to defend, but I'm not any better here. Now I'm probably a little bit worse. Now I have the inferior pawn structure. So I played knight f3, and he took, and I think after these trades, it is starting to level off once again. Queen f5. Queen f5 seems like a weird move, but I actually think it's good, apparently. It's just kind of odd to create a queen-bishop battery like that with the queen in front. But black does need the bishop here guarding the e8 square. And here he ran out of time after knight d4. Yeah, looks like a level endgame. So if I take here, he's going to take on c2. This didn't seem like it was anything for me, even though I can check him on these 2 squares. His king is just escaping. And I don't think my queen and my knight coordinate effectively enough to create any meaningful threats. Problem is I always have to take a timeout to defend my own king. Like if I could play knight d4 here without getting checkmated, then I would certainly do that and try to create threats on like e6 or maybe c6. But it's just not possible. So after knight d4, queen e5, how does this endgame go? Let's just explore this for a moment. Knight b5, bishop takes c2, take a7. I have an outside pass pawn, but the computer says black is even for choice. Yeah, this is one thing I mentioned. Notice that my king, if it wants to take a diagonal route up the board, I have to play f3 first to do that. His king has immediate access. And king centralization is so crucial in the endgame, as I've noted before, that his king just gets into the thick of things faster. And my a-pawn is not yet far enough advanced and dangerous, and his bishop does a good job of controlling the advance. So would have been interesting to see how the game would have proceeded, but yeah, time is a big important aspect of the game, and he just didn't have much of it right at the end. Otherwise, a pretty good game. I think some nice subtleties there. I'd like to think over the board I could figure out the right continuation to win the d4 pawn, like this f3, queen f4 idea. It's pretty subtle, though, and it requires some prophylaxis, like getting out of the way, and also seeing that you can't just go after the pawn immediately like I did, because black has that d5 resource of f3. So, yeah, well-played game, though, I think, by both sides. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll be back again soon with another video. Talk to you guys later. Bye.